Before I get into the meat of this video, I want to give a brief spoiler warning. I will not be talking about any new megas in any specifics here, and if I'm going to talk plot spoilers, I'll give a warning beforehand. I will be talking about the story and gameplay structure, however. I.E. New megas are introduced in this format, so if that's too much in the way of spoilers for you, add this video to your watch later list and come back another time. Now that that's done, I have been playing Pokemon Legends ZA recently, and I think of all the Switch Pokemon games, from a purely technical standpoint, it is the best by a country mile. It has the most polished mechanics, visuals, performance, and gameplay loop by far. At the same time, I personally like Legends Arceus more, and the reason I like Legends Arceus more is the exact thing that makes Legends CA good. Most people would agree with me that modern Pokemon games tend to be flawed. I'd like to make a longer video one day analysing this in more depth, as it has been a problem since Gen 4, honestly. But long story short, Pokemon has always had a ridiculously short development cycle, and with the move to the Switch, it finally hit the point where Game Freak is literally not being given enough time to actually make a full game. It is a lot easier to make some pixel art for 200 or so characters than it is to make 3D models of over 1,000. Combined with the demand for more complex stories, features, and open world environments alongside that, yeah, it makes total sense that most Pokemon Switch games are bad, because you cannot make a 3D open world game that's good in 2 years. It is simply impossible. So, Switch Pokemon games are forced to cut corners. Pokemon Sword and Shield is more polished on a technical level than most of the others. There's no bugs, no lags, and with the exception of one tree, the visual direction tends to be solid, but it came at the cost of an extremely short main story riddled with cut content and painfully linear routes. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee has the advantage of being a fairly simplistic remake, and then, well, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet? Yeesh. Those games took the opposite approach from Sword and Shield and actually had a complete storyline and a large open world at the cost of being a bug-ridden, laggy mess. While I think Legends Arceus was the best Switch-era Pokemon game before Legends CA came around, it still got its problems. From a technical standpoint, the draw-in and graphics are honestly just bad, and from a gameplay one, the battle system is both mediocre and incredibly underutilized. In contrast, Legends ZA has none of those egregious issues. The performance is a huge step up from both Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, and part of that could be because I played it on the Switch too, but given I haven't heard people complain about how it works on the Switch 1, I feel very safe assuming it blows its predecessors out of the water there too. The gameplay loop is fun, especially after you get the Mega Ring and the game opens up. While the plot isn't anything fantastic, the characters are charming, and to be honest, you shouldn't be playing Pokemon for the story anyway. Catching is still fun, even if it's not quite as robust as it was in Legends Arceus, and movement, for lack of a better term, feels good too. It's satisfying collecting things, exploring the wild zones, and discovering more of Lumiose City. On the topic of Lumiose City, however, that is Legends ZA's biggest problem too. Because, well, the setting just gets a bit repetitive after a while. And by that, I mean fairly quickly. While the wild zones are decent and have some variety to them, they are so small and static compared to the rolling forests, deep swamps, and wide open tundras where Pokemon roamed in Legends Arceus. In general, I also found there was no point going back to them once I'd caught every Pokemon available in each one. As a result of that, I spent most of my time in-game not in the wild zones, but in Lumiose City proper, where 90% of the environments look identical beyond having potentially different coloured roofs. Like, I can't tell which of the rooftops I've explored and which ones I haven't, because god damn, they all look the exact same. And yes, just like you shouldn't be playing Pokemon for the story, you also absolutely should not be playing it for the graphics either. They have always been somewhat ugly, that's nothing new. But when the blandness makes it so that you have no idea what you've already seen and what you haven't, in a game where exploration is meant to be a feature, that's a problem. A big problem. At the same time, Lumiose City is the exact reason why Legends CA is so good in nearly every single other regard. Why? Because the simple, repetitive environmental design allowed Game Freak to put all of their budget into doing everything else. The reason the art direction and the new designs are generally good, the reason the battles are fun, dynamic and satisfying, and the rogue mega evolutions are a delight, the fun cast and satisfactory story, all of that is because Game Freak didn't need to spend a ton of time working on the world, like they did in all the other Switch Pokemon games. Because like the rest of its brethren, Legends CA needed to compromise, and the compromise it made was to keep the environment simple. And as you can probably tell by how complimentary I've been towards everything else in the game, it's a compromise that really worked. Now, Legends CA is not perfect. First of all, nothing is, and secondly, I've got a whole series of minor gripes with it that I'll talk about in more detail soon, beyond Lumiose's bland visuals. But, well, they are minor. And Legends CA absolutely does the things it wants to do. Read Be the Battling and Megas game. I am now going to break down each individual element of Legends CA in a bit more detail to extrapolate on this point. The CA Royale, Combat, and Promotion matches. The CA Royale is the core mechanic lying at the heart of Legends CA. Each evening, an area of Lumiose is gated off, and past the hollow walls, anyone who sees you will strike, unless you sneak up on them and strike first. After racking up a certain amount of points in the Royale, you will be allowed to participate in a promotion match, and, on winning, you progress through the story. So, the game works like this. The daytime is used to catch Pokemon and complete side quests, while your nights are used to kill. When first going into the game, I had some trepidation about this. Firstly, random trainer battles are definitely not the most engaging thing in Pokemon games most of the time. Secondly, Legends CA uses a whole new real-time combat system, and as someone who generally prefers turn-based over real-time games, I was a bit leery. In this regard, however, Legends CA blew me out of the water. Firstly, While it took me a little bit of time to adapt to, I really enjoyed the new battle system. It's somewhat reminiscent of a simplified Xenoblade Chronicles, which is never a bad thing. While the trailers vastly overhyped the implied dodging and terrain mechanics, with them both being present but ultimately forgettable, there's still a lot of intricacy when it comes to timing and the area of effect of moves, which more than makes up for it. It's also quite fun being the trainer who ambushes instead of the one who's ambushed for once, with a minor but still present reward in the battles if you do the stealth segments well. That doesn't mean enemy trainers are pushovers though. Holy hell, some of them have the ears and eyesight of the gods. Step in their direction and they'll notice you. Finally, there's collectible prize medals which increase your score scattered across the battle zones, along with bonus cards that give you extra points if you complete certain tasks, such as one-shotting Pokemon in an ambush. These gamify the battle zones even further and keep things really fresh, especially since sometimes, if you want to complete those bonus cards, you'll actively have to make suboptimal choices in battle. Ultimately, the battle zones end up being a fun balancing challenge. Do you aim to complete cards, or to defeat as many trainers as you can in battle? The Royale isn't perfect, admittedly, but my main criticisms are minor. Firstly, while trainers of higher ranks than you technically do appear, I only noticed it happen once, which is a shame, as I think it's a mechanic with a lot of potential. I want B-rank trainers to appear when I'm on rank W, Game Freak, not just rank C. Give them like the glowing eyes and sound effect of the alphas and make them into a nasty stealth section. Unless you're feeling ballsy. Secondly, if you are raising a 6 Pokemon team, you get way too much XP. I was horrifically overleveled by the time I hit rank D, though to be fair, this isn't just a Legend ZA problem, as it's an issue I've had in most main series Switch Pokemon games. Maybe I'll make a video about it one day, who knows. My final, minor, gripe with the Battle Royale contains an early to mid-game story spoiler, so please skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want to hear that. People who've played the games probably have a hunch what I'm going to talk about here, and yeah, it's that you get skipped all the way from rank W to rank F. I kinda understand why Game Freak did this, because A, like I said, you get so much XP in this game, you'd be hitting level 100 halfway through if you did all 26 ranks, and B, because they'd either have to bloat the number of supporting characters and side plots, or ranks Z to F would get really boring compared to the rogue Mega Evolution encounters, and fast. At the same time, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth that in a game based around a 26 rank tournament, you only actually do 10 of them. On the topic of ranks, I want to talk about the promotion matches. While the first few are a little bit forgettable in contrast to the ZA Royale itself, once you get the Mega Ring, that changes. Each trainer from rank F onwards has their own subplot, which introduces not just your inevitable opponent, but also their greatest ally, and both of them will battle you with new, unforeseen megas. Out of all the regional gimmicks Game Freak has introduced, megas have always been my favourite. Like most of these regional gimmicks, however, I found them to be woefully underutilised in the game they were introduced in. There are literally 3 trainers that have megas before the post-game in X and Y, which was supposed to be the Mega Evolution game, and nearly all the Mega Stones were post-game only. and I generally don't particularly play Pokemon Post games. ORAS handles them much better, but they are still somewhat lacking until the last quarter of the game. ZA, however, holy crap. Just holy crap. When I said this was the Megas and battling game, I was not lying. I would honestly say that ZA doesn't truly begin until you get the Mega Ring, which happens when your Pokemon are around level 30, and you therefore have over half the game to use them, and more critically, get them used against you. As I mentioned earlier, once you hit rank F, advancing in the ZA Royale introduces you to not one, but 2 new Megas per round. As someone who tried to avoid as many spoilers as possible, albeit not perfectly, the build-up and execution of these moments were always great. You meet the character, you go through their subplot, and the anticipation of finally seeing their ace rises until you finally get the chance to fight them. Afterwards, their Mega Stones will become available to purchase, and you too will be able to add a Mega whatever to your team. The ZA Royale isn't the only vehicle Game Freak uses to introduce Megas, however. No. There are the Rogue Mega Evolution fights. Unlocked between the various rounds of the ZA Royale, these battles take cue from the noble fights in Legends Arceus, with you battling a supersized Mega Evolution of a wild Pokemon, which doesn't just try to defeat your team, but you, as in the trainer themselves. While the arenas are generally pretty bland, it's made up for by some of the iconic animations and moves pulled off by the Rogue Megas, and they are genuinely difficult to fight at times. Unlike in Legends Arceus, trainer health recovers over time, which in some ways makes them easier. I never lost to a single Rogue Mega in ZA, while a couple of the nobles in Arceus kicked my ass. At the same time, because of this, Game Freak absolutely did not hold back in some of these fights when it comes to the Rogue Mega's movesets. And let me tell you, HP recovery or not, I had some close calls. The challenge in the Rogue Mega Evolution battles doesn't just come from keeping your trainer alive, too. The Rogue Megas barely take any damage unless you use a plus move, which requires a good chunk of energy from your Mega Evolution gauge, unless you Mega Evolve yourself, which automatically turns all your moves into plus moves with no cost. This was a bit of an ingenious design choice on Game Freak's behalf, honestly, because it really encourages you to use a Mega Evolution of your own in these fights. Combining this with a few plot-relevant Mega Evolutions, ZA both utilizes Mega Evolution as an obstacle to take down and as a special weapon of your own to wield. 10 out of 10, no notes. I have zero complaints about how Mega Evolution was utilized in this game, and if we ever get another Pokemon game with Mega Evolution as a core mechanic, I really hope it takes notes from ZA. Other activities to complete in Lumiose. Now that I've talked about the 2 mechanics Game Freak centered ZA around, it's time to talk about, well, everything else. I explained most of my thoughts on Wild Zones earlier, but I want to say a couple more small things here. Specifically, I want to elaborate on the reasons why I think most of them aren't that interesting. The big one is that 95% of the time, spawns are static. They'll almost always be the same Pokemon in the same place, with the exception of a couple of rare spawns, which is just boring, honestly. I really hope they add more randomness to encounters in future Pokemon games, because Oof. Unlike Lumiose proper, which has a few areas with elaborate layouts, most wild zones are also just very simplistic. It would have been so much better if, minor spoilers ahead, skip to the timestamp on screen if you want to dodge them, they were more like the two actual dungeons in the game, the sewers and the more spoilery one you get at rank B. Those were actually decently fun, so it's obvious Game Freak has the skill to pull more complex areas off if they want to, and if they also get the budget for it. Loosely related to the wild zones is catching Pokemon in general. It's better than it is at the mainline games still, but a significant downgrade from Legends Arceus. The non-Pokeball throwing options are all absent, such as smoke balls and sticky globs, and given not all wild zones have areas to hide in, it basically railroads you into using the battle mechanic in a bunch of places, which is an actively worse way of trying to catch Pokemon than without fighting. Because if you feint a Pokemon, you'll get a brief period of time where their catch rate increases dramatically. But if your Pokeball fails anyway, the Pokemon will despawn, making you lose the encounter purely due to luck. Compared to Legends Arceus, where you could pretty much catch anything with the right skill level and resources, it's, well, like I said, it's a downgrade. Moving on to something more positive though, I want to give a quick shout out to the obstacle courses around Lumiose. They are pretty small and fairly minor, but I was always happy to waste a minute or so whenever I encountered them. I do wish the game told you that you can sort of jump by rolling. I had a bad time with a certain frog-related side quest at first, but beyond that, I enjoyed Game Freak's first attempt at platforming. It's definitely a mechanic I can see future Legends games digging into a bit more. On the topic of Lumiose, the last thing I want to talk about related to the actual city itself are interiors. There's been a lot of complaints about the lack of them online, and honestly, the only thing I can say to that is get real. There hasn't been proper interiors in a Pokemon game since Sun and Moon, and to be blunt, if Pokemon needs to cut things to make a functional game, I am totally down for random houses and stores being the first thing to go. No, actually, copy-paste houses with some random NPC dialogue and maybe a new item have never been Pokemon's strength, and never will be. Don't get me wrong, I really would like it if Pokemon actually had these small, somewhat irrelevant details still, but until Game Freak either reduces the scope of the games, or the Pokemon Company gives them twice the amount of time to work on them, the lack of interiors is not changing, and people need to manage their expectations. If this or the graphical quality alone ruined your experience with ZA, you don't actually like Pokemon. You like the memories of it you had when you were a child, and were too young to notice or care about the jank. Moving away from the city itself and back to the things to do in it, my final topic for this section are the game's side quests. I don't think they are as iconic as some of the Legends Arceus ones, but I also kinda disagree with the fandom consensus that they are bad. There's a fair few that are forgettable, yes, but I think a lot of the fandom's ire towards them is due to the fact that most of the battle-focused side quests are there to explicitly explain game mechanics to small children who, speaking from experience as someone who was once a small child playing Pokemon, absolutely need those explanations. So, I really can't knock points from Legends ZA for, actually making things accessible to their target audience of 8-year-olds. When engaging in media you are not the target demographic for, sometimes you need to adjust your expectations. Combined with the handful of actually good quests, such as the iconic museum one, I really think the side quests in Legends CA average out into being decent. Decent enough for me to wish mainline Pokemon games had a proper side quest system, that's for sure. The story. I will be talking about plot spoilers here, so please, if you haven't yet reached the credits, skip to the next section. When it comes to Pokemon game storylines, I have fairly low expectations, as long as it's compelling enough to inspire me to go from point A to point B. It's doing the job. On the other hand, unlike the quality of the games in general, the quality of the writing in Pokemon has predominantly been on an upwards trend since ORAS. Sun and Moon and Scarlet and Violet have the most emotional impact out of all of the mainline Pokemon games story-wise in my opinion, and Legends ZA doesn't hit those heights. In fact, I would say the game is carried hard by its very charming cast. Urbane and Tawny, Lida and Naveen are a huge step up from the original Carlos friend group, and there's plenty of fun hijinks to be had with characters such as Corbeau, Yacinth, etc, etc. That leads to my first problem with the game's story, however, and that's that there's no actual character development. Pretty much everyone ends the game in the same state they started it. Naveen is still a stoic tsundere. Lida is still a perky girl who doesn't put much thought into battling, etc, etc. Most of the characters that change brackets, such as Corbeau again, haven't gone through a revolutionary, life-changing experience or anything. We're just seeing more of their personality as a whole. The only exceptions to this I'd say are Lysander, who had the first half of his character arc in another game, and to a lesser degree, Grisham and Grizel. That leads me to my next big problem with ZA's story structure. Namely, the fact that the overarching plot barely exists until rank B. While anyone who's played X and Y knows that AZ regrets his past misdeeds, for people new to the region, or, the characters in universe, the things discovered in the Lysander labs should have had a massive emotional impact. Instead, all doubts about AZ are cleared up in a single conversation, and then the events of the climax kick off. Imagine if the Grisham plot didn't happen at rank B, but at around rank E. If the knowledge of Angie and the fact that you are cleaning up AZ's past mistakes, again, was revealed at the beginning of the mid-game, instead of its end, ZA's storyline could have had so much more meat. If Team MZ genuinely had to grapple with the reveals, it could have been the basis of the character development they sorely needed. And between that and Quasartico Inc. doing a few dodgy things for the greater good, it could have been a really interesting examination of grey morality. Well, by children's game standards, at least. If the latter half of the game was also about repairing Team MZ's relationship with AZ after Grisham shattered it, it would have given the game's ending even more impact. On that note, I absolutely have to talk about the fact that, yep, Game Freak killed off a main character. I picked up the implications in AZ's dialogue, but until we saw his grave itself, I was convinced they were going to chicken out at the last second. Suffice to say, I'm really happy Game Freak didn't. For all my gripes with ZA's plot, it was a very fitting ending. AZ passed on his legacy to Team MZ, finally able to rest in peace now that the last of his wrongs have been righted. Ultimately, I think ZA's storyline had a handful of really good moments, even if it didn't reach the heights it could have. While it doesn't break into the top 3 Pokemon stories for me, it's still in the top half of them. And yet again, as I've said numerous times, I ain't playing Pokemon for the story, even if it can be a nice bonus. Hopes for the future. So, those are my thoughts on Legends ZA. If you've watched this far, like, and maybe even subscribe, especially if you're a JRPG fan in general. The video is not over yet though. There's one more thing I'd like to talk about, specifically Pokemon's future. While I both hope and expect the normal Pokemon games to retain their traditional turn-based combat, I'd more than welcome the real-time action becoming a mainstay for the Legends series. I genuinely think that a Pokemon game that has the robust catching and exploring mechanics of Legends Arceus, even if it's scaled down slightly, along with the stealth-focused real-time battles of Legends ZA, has the potential to become the Pokemon franchise's best game yet. Especially if they got the writers and composers of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky to handle those respective elements. Admittedly, as long as Game Freak keeps up to 2 to 3 year development cycles, I don't think we are getting that anytime soon. But hey, a girl can hope. In terms of the next Legends game, I generally think it's pointless speculating on its setting. We were all convinced we were going to get Johto or Unova backstory games, after all, only to get whacked in the head with X and Y too. I do think it would be neat though if we got a game set in Pokemon's far future next time around. Whether it's a PG-13 rated dystopian Kanto where Team Rocket has taken over the world, or Hoenn, but climate change has flooded the region so it's all water, or heck, even a game entirely set in Ultra Space. I think there's a lot of fun ideas that could be explored in that time period. But who knows, Game Freak could continue the trend of giving their less polished games a little bit of love and make Scarlet and Violet too. And now I think that really is all I've got to say about ZA at the moment. Depending on how interesting I find the Mega Dimension DLC, I might make a video on that, even if it's just a short, and once it's released, I'd like to make an all-new Megas tier list video. But until then, farewell my fellow Pokemon fans. And possibly haters. I'm sure some of you are watching this too. Later!